Arthur did not fully understand Winsome's purpose when he was asked to hunt for certain objects. However, if this was part of the training process and could speed up his progress, then it made sense. Inwardly, Arthur pondered the list of items to look for. The first was a squirrel raptor feather. This task seemed simple enough, except for the fact that he had to find and photograph a squirrel in good condition. As he thought about the 3 items requested by Winsome, Arthur began to consider that this might be a test to gauge my internal mana manipulation skills. If this was the case, then the raptor squirrel must have certain skills that required a considerable degree of mastery on Arthur's part. The fact that raptor squirrels are at the bottom of the food chain suggests that these animals may have developed defense mechanisms to protect themselves from predators. According to the picture, the raptor squirrel looks similar to an ordinary squirrel, but it has more prominent hind limbs, 3 tails, and beady eyes. Arthur looked around carefully, but didn't spot any wildlife. Concentrating his mana into his eyes, he tried to increase his range of vision. However, the result was nil. Arthur continued to look for signs of fauna as he walked towards the edge of the forest. Several hours passed without any clues. Frustration began to overcome him. The sound of the bells attached to his body seemed to grow more and more mocking, blocking any attempt to get close to any creature. The night grew darker, and Arthur's mood grew grimmer. He decided to set up camp on a fallen tree trunk, hoping to rest. However, as soon as Arthur lay down, the sounds of small animals hidden in the darkness of the night began to be heard around his campsite. When he tried to get up, the loud tinkling of bells sent the creatures scurrying away. Arthur let out a long sigh, decided to continue the search the next day, and snuggled back into the blankets, feeling the cold wind flowing through the log he was leaning against and through the clothes he was wearing. A ray of morning light managed to penetrate through the layers of leaves and branches, waking Arthur from his slumber. He remained hidden inside the log and tried not to disturb the bells. Although the bells seemed to be the main factor keeping the squirrel raptors away, Arthur began to realize that it wasn't the only reason. Prey animals at the bottom of the food chain may have developed very keen senses to avoid predators. This explains why they kept their distance, even though Arthur was almost asleep and frozen. Concealing his presence is the best strategy to draw squirrel raptors out of their hiding places. After a short search, Arthur found a sizable bush near an open area. This bush was dense enough for him to hide in. He made himself as comfortable as possible among the stiff branches and thorny leaves, and began to wait. Arthur decided to cancel the constant flow of mana surrounding his body. He did not move and observed the surroundings attentively. Although his body was stronger thanks to his assimilation with Sylvia's will, he still felt a little vulnerable without protection in this strange place. Time passed from minutes to hours as he waited. Arthur realized that simply retracting mana was not enough. It was important to clear one's mind and intentions when facing prey. He could feel his breath becoming soft, almost disappearing as he exhaled into the occasional breeze. Finally, the fruits of Arthur's labor began to show. A small snout emerged from one of the bushes cautiously, curiously sniffing for signs of danger. Before long, several raptor squirrels appeared with their 3 tails constantly spinning like antennae, trying to find food before predators caught wind of their presence. Arthur realized that it was impossible to capture the first item on the list today, so he took this opportunity to test a few things. He began by emitting a small amount of mana. The raptor squirrels immediately responded by raising their hind legs, seemingly sensing the tiny fluctuations in mana and becoming more alert, some even scurrying away. As he continued to test their limits, Arthur learned 3 important things. First, releasing a small amount of purified mana did not necessarily make them leave, but it was enough to alarm them that it was difficult to catch them. Second, internalizing mana inside his body does not trigger their alarm signals, but excessive concentration and focus can cause his will to be drained, making them scatter. Third, the external flow of mana neither startles nor awakens them. Arthur learned this while sitting hidden and meditating. When he absorbed the mana around him, There was no sign of restlessness from the predatory squirrels. It was only when he began to purify and condense the mana that they began to realize something was wrong. However, at some point, the soft rays of the morning sun woke him up. After packing his things, he filled his bag with the morning dew that formed from the surrounding leaves and walked into the clearing. His main goal today was not to observe or catch squirrel raptors, but rather to test out an idea that came to him based on the 3 observations he made yesterday. In the middle of a small clearing surrounded by the plants and mushrooms he had collected, Arthur put the theory he had been thinking about into practice. As an augmenter, Arthur's mana channels, which were responsible for spreading the purified mana from the core throughout the body, were much more developed compared to the mana blood vessels used to absorb mana from the atmosphere into the body. For this technique, Arthur had to balance the output of purified mana from the core with the input of atmospheric mana through his blood vessels. In theory, with perfect balance, Arthur should be able to use mana without anyone being able to sense it. However, his mana veins were far less developed than his mana channels. Therefore, he started by matching the mana output he could produce with the amount he could put in. This feeling reminded him of the first time he learned the mana rotation technique from Sylvia, but it was much more difficult. It required special finesse to strike a balance between the 2 opposing actions, especially while standing still. Doing it while moving became a much greater challenge. As Arthur practiced, his time perception began to fade, and when he opened his eyes again, he saw a predatory squirrel eating from the pile of food he had placed. However, his excitement soon faded when his concentration broke, and the squirrel soon realized which fluctuations he was trying to disguise. The next morning, Arthur continued his training routine in the same clearing. Only on the 4th day, he felt he had mastered the technique enough to try moving while maintaining it. By the end of the week, he was able to move slowly, but the bell tied around his waist made the squirrels flee even though he managed to hide his presence. Arthur realized that if he only needed to hide his presence, this technique did not need to be fully mastered. He had to master this technique to use mana suddenly, such as pouncing on predatory squirrels before they reacted to the sound of the bell. By drawing a line on the soft ground and positioning himself in front of a predetermined tree as a target, Arthur practiced. His goal was to reach the tree by the time the bell rang, so he had to use mana to move at a sufficient speed without shaking the bell, while balancing the input and output streams of atmospheric mana and purified mana to disguise his presence from the predatory squirrels' tails. As he continued training, Arthur felt that this technique was similar to the technique Cordry used when training with him, controlling the flow of mana and power while manipulating presence to hide or radiate. It is the essence of the technique. Although each trial brought Arthur closer to the goal, he felt how difficult it was to perform this instant step precisely. This technique, coupled with the combat form Cordry taught and the sword arts he developed himself, can be an important trump card. Arthur remembers how confused and helpless he was when Cordry used this ability, erasing his presence while attacking and radiating his presence to shift positions, knocking him off his feet. Days passed as Arthur continued to practice. At one point, he chuckled in triumph as he looked at the depressed dirt trail he had made over the days. While the rest of the ground was littered with leaves and broken branches, only the path he had always traveled seemed smooth. Despite feeling tired and his legs trembling, Arthur felt at ease for the first time since coming to this cursed forest. Triumphantly, he expressed his determination to exterminate the predatory squirrels. Meanwhile, Winsome mused about what Arthur was planning. Having left him unattended for 2 weeks, Winsome felt that Arthur had mastered the technique of erasing his presence. Nonetheless, Arthur had not yet managed to catch the raptor squirrels, which are extremely fast and perceptive. The squirrels relied on their noses and tails to sense mana fluctuations. If they detected a high concentration of mana or a small change in the level of mana, it would be difficult for Arthur to catch them. However, Arthur had learned the skill that Winsome wanted, the Mirage Walk technique. Although it seemed crude, Arthur had managed to achieve the first step of the technique. Mirage Walk was the core of the Theist clan's power. For him, being able to grasp the basics of a mana art that took years to understand, even though he had only observed Cordry, showed tremendous progress. Arthur Lewin watched intently as he used Burst Step to approach his target. His eyes were fixed on the Silver Panther known as Claude. Claude was a very cunning and arrogant Silver Panther. Arthur had set Claude as his primary target during his Silver Panther hunt, given Claude's reputation as one of the most elusive of its kind. Arthur had carefully prepared a trap, placing a killed raptor squirrel as bait to lure Claude out. Now he hid behind the bushes, making sure that no trace of his presence remained. By combining the raw mana around him with the purified mana inside his body, he gathered mana in his right leg and arm, carefully preparing for an attack. Claude, with sharp instincts, paused for a moment and began to look around him, ready to flee in case of danger. Arthur waited patiently for Claude to refocus on his lunch. As Claude bent down, Arthur used Burst Step to launch himself at a surprising speed. However, his attack was in vain as Claude had disappeared before he could touch it. Arthur felt frustrated as his hand was buried in the soft soil, trying to get it out. He cursed, feeling disappointed at a mistake he couldn't understand. He examined Claude's footprints and his own, trying to figure out what went wrong. Despite his near-perfect technique, Claude still managed to dodge his attack. Arthur tried to replay the incident in his mind, wondering why Claude could react so quickly. In his quest to understand the mistake, Arthur recalled a previous experience when he hunted squirrel raptors. He wondered if there was a significant difference between the speed of raptor squirrels and silver panthers that affected his ability to succeed in hunting. After not getting a satisfactory answer, Arthur decided to go back. He was annoyed that the remains of the raptor squirrel that Claude had previously eaten left nothing for him to consume. He washed the dirt and blood from his body in a nearby stream, remembering that the clothes he was wearing had become tattered due to the intense training and hiking in the forest. While observing his reflection in the river, Arthur reflected on his now disheveled and unkempt appearance. His long, disheveled hair, coupled with blackened eye bags from lack of sleep, made him look much different from his old self. He found it hard to believe that it had been over a month since he last interacted with anyone other than the animals he captured. Winsome, a mentor who appeared on the night when Arthur finally caught the predatory squirrel, provided little information about the technique called Mirage Walk. After his brief explanation, Winsome disappeared, leaving Arthur with limited information and alone to eat the lean meat of a raptor squirrel's hind leg. Arthur continued his search the next day, hoping to find a silver panther. However, during his weeks of practicing in the forest, he found no sign of the larger beasts. He decided to venture further into the forest despite the danger. After about 3 weeks of grueling travel, Arthur began to see larger animal species. During the journey, he practiced using the burst technique or burst step, which was part of the Mirage Walk training. Although Winsome only gave a basic explanation of the technique, Arthur decided to name this technique the first-level burst step. With determination and perseverance, Arthur continued to practice and deepen his understanding of the technique, hoping to achieve full mastery and eventually succeed in his mission. Arthur Lewin, walking through a dense forest, utilizes trees as natural obstacles in his technique training. The abundant presence of these trees not only provided protection, but also served as an effective training tool, deepening the skill and understanding of the Mirage Walk technique. As dusk began to envelop the forest in darkness, Arthur decided to take a short break. He washed himself in a nearby stream and checked the remaining meat he had brought with him. Realizing that his supplies were not enough, Arthur gathered some mushrooms found along the way and crouched under a large root, about 8 meters away from a strategic location. With his skills mastered, Arthur could clear a distance of 10 meters in an instant using burst step without attracting attention. As the forest grew darker, Arthur watched closely for signs of movement around him. A faint rustling sound could be heard from above, and he saw the last flash of sunlight reflecting off the eyes of a black bird of prey flying above the trees. The bird seemed like an indistinct threat in the darkness of the night. Finally, Arthur spotted the lone squirrel raptor and decided to wait for the right moment. Suddenly, the black bird, almost invisible, made a surprise attack. The bird swooped down with its talons ready to grip its prey. The raptor squirrel jumped as an instinctive reaction to the threat, but the bird swiftly extended its talons towards where the squirrel had jumped. Losing the food of the raptor squirrel to the bird was a loss, but Arthur gained something more valuable. He waited patiently for the blackbird to finish its meal and move on to another tree. Realizing that the bird needed more than one squirrel to get its fill, Arthur decided to take advantage of the opportunity. About half an hour later, another raptor squirrel appeared, cautiously approaching the pile of mushrooms. As soon as the blackbird swooped down again, Arthur seized the moment by using the burst step to approach the bird in record time. Before the bird could react, Arthur managed to catch and break its neck, earning the bird an extra meal. With his 2 trophies, Arthur returned to his humble camp, made of hollow logs lined with twigs and leaves for protection. He vigorously cleaned the bird's feathers and roasted it alongside a skinned raptor squirrel. While savoring the bird's tender thigh meat, Arthur mused about his experience. The observation of the blackbird catching the raptor squirrel taught him a valuable lesson. The bird had an advantage in terms of speed and prey capturing skills. The bird was able to make a surprise attack because of its knowledge of the prey's behavior. Arthur concluded that, as an observer, he could understand the bird's motives even before the attack, something the squirrel could not know. This lesson gave Arthur additional insight into his strategy for hunting and utilizing the mirage walk technique. Arthur continued to chew the remaining roast bird meat left in his hand as he pondered how to catch Claude. All his previous attempts seemed to have been in vain. Arthur realized that Claude, along with its kindred species, had a very keen intuition, allowing it to react quickly to visible movements. Unlike the birds and squirrels he had previously captured, Claude was very smart. Even when Arthur was already in close range, Claude seemed to taunt him. Whenever Arthur took a position to attack, Claude always ran away before he could activate burst step. Claude's dodging skills showed that it was intelligent and knew how to avoid danger, despite its inability to fight head-on. After finishing the last of his remaining food, Arthur walked towards the side of the camp, where he had cleared an area for training. Standing at the edge of the open space, he envisioned Claude lurking at the other end. The question was, how could he catch a cat that reacted immediately when he tried to approach it? The idea of how the blackbird he had seen showing itself to deceive squirrels came to mind. The blackbird used the tactic to carry the squirrel into the air, a place where the squirrel could not change direction and was trapped. Arthur then thought of the burst step technique he had learned. Although this technique basically involved one very quick step, he had to use the right muscles to perform it. The mirage walk technique used by Cordry and Azura also basically involves physical steps, although it hides the mana fluctuations to throw the opponent off completely. Arthur wondered what if he could eliminate the physical movement required to perform the walk. Could he create the illusion as if he was actually teleporting from a stationary position? Utilizing the knowledge from his past life, Arthur realized that he had an important advantage. Although his ki center was not very strong, he had studied the mechanics of the human body in depth. This knowledge allowed him to better utilize his internal energy. With great concentration, Arthur began to spread mana throughout the small gaps in his body, attempting to divert the energy in a way that would allow him to develop more efficient techniques. When the sun was already high in the sky, Arthur's body, which was covered in sweat and dirt after hours of standing still, finally felt exhausted. However, a sense of satisfaction filled his heart. He felt happy that he had achieved a significant breakthrough that took him to the peak of the Yum-Ki stage and found the answers he had been searching for. Knowledge of the human muscular system, such as the quadriceps and hamstrings, glutes, and calf muscles, and how these muscles work together to produce movement, helped him in this process. Arthur realized that in order to improve his mirage walk technique, he had to utilize this knowledge and apply it in a new way. With the practical steps he had learned, Arthur felt ready to take on the next challenge. The basics of the burst step that he successfully executed at first seemed like a wide, yet extremely fast jump. This was because even though mana could not be sensed under the effects of mirage walk, there were still body mechanics and a series of movements required for the human body to perform the step. Cordry, as an Ashura who uses burst step in his human form, also cannot ignore his body mechanics despite his superior physique. Arthur worked by deliberately manipulating mana, channeling it to certain muscles at the right time to artificially trigger a sequence in his body that mimicked the use of muscles without the need to physically move. If he could perfect the timing and output of mana, he would be able to do something that even Cordry could not: perform a mirage walk from an orthostatic or standing position. His mind was in turmoil as he tried to visualize the technique. After dinner, Arthur returned to the clearing he had been optimizing for the past week. Standing about 5 meters away from a bed of foliage, designed to cushion the fall, he concentrated. Despite feeling tired, he exerted himself to manipulate his muscles, as if using his mind to organize mimic movements. Body movements that were usually done automatically, such as breathing, felt like they had to be relearned because he was using mana as an intermediary factor. Arthur tried hard to avoid soreness in his legs and minimize body movements while training. Controlling a technique that involves manipulating mana to manipulate the way the body works is very challenging. Although the basic steps of Mirage Walk, where he hides the mana fluctuations in the body, have become easier, he still needs to balance the capacity of the mana blood vessels to control it better. However, time constraints prevented him from completing all the desired improvements. By properly concealing his presence, Arthur envisioned the muscular system in his body. Recalling the basic techniques required for the burst step, he tried once again. Interrelated body parts appeared in his mind's eye, making it easy for Arthur to conceptualize the specific sequence he wanted. He felt the appropriate muscle pulses as the mana flowed at his command. With a slight shift of the left foot and the help of mana, the scenery around him became blurry as he tried to execute the burst step from an upright position. Although the mana strengthened his legs from the pressure, a sharp pain coursed through his lower body. Tipping forward and falling into a pile of leaves, Arthur was frustrated at not being able to stop properly. Like a toddler who can't control how far or high he jumps, the manipulation of mana to control the inside of the body makes it very difficult. However, the initial and basic steps of the Mirage Walk, where he manipulated atmospheric mana to hide the mana fluctuations in his body, became easier. As the sun sank and the crescent moon came into view, Arthur lay on a bed of leaves, staring blankly at the night sky. He raised his hand and pinched what looked like the moon with his finger. The moon looked very small from here, creating a feeling of smallness in the presence of the moon. Arthur focused on his left arm, staring at the feather Sylvia had given him and the dragon will he had received. These items were his only memories of the Ashura that had saved him, guarded him, and protected him when he was a child. He wondered if this training would take him back in time. Hearing from Sylvia again. With a sigh, Arthur patted his cheeks and got up from the pile of leaves. He realized that his time was limited in this forest and could not waste it. Taking a deep breath, he began to cultivate his mana core. The process was slow after reaching the light yellow stage, similar to scraping a mountain with a spoon. However, he felt definite progress. Caught up in the process of absorption, purification, and refinement, Arthur was awakened by the familiar chirping of morning birds. His body was dirty and sweaty, showing the results of his hard work. Realizing the need to hunt, he took a bite of the cured squirrel meat, packed the water bag, and set off. Keeping calm and concealing his whereabouts using Mirage Walk, he slowly entered the deeper forest, avoiding the hunting near the campsite that had become too frequent. However, despite the mana he willed to strengthen the leg from the pressure, pain still coursed through his lower body. Arthur shrieked as he tumbled forward and fell into the pile of leaves once again. He felt like he was failing to stop, and even if mana could have helped him with the initial burst of speed, it was very difficult to stop in the exact position and location he wanted. As the sun sank and the crescent moon came into view, Arthur lay down on a bed of leaves while staring blankly at the night sky. He raised his hand and pinched what looked like the moon with his fingers. The moon looked small from here, and Arthur wondered how small he was in front of the moon. He focused on the left arm that had been raised, looking at the feather Sylvia had given him to cover the orb, and the dragon wool Sylvia had given him. These were the only remaining memories of the Azura that had saved him, guarded him, and protected him as a child. Arthur hoped that this training would help him hear from Sylvia again someday. Remembering the time he had spent with Sylvia, Arthur missed his family. Although their separation was difficult, he felt lost and missed the people who had been a part of his life. He patted his cheeks and sat up from the pile of leaves, realizing that he could not waste time in this cursed forest. With a deep breath, Arthur began to cultivate his mana core. The process was slow after reaching the light yellow stage, like scraping a mountain with a spoon, but he felt progress. Just as he was lost in the process of absorbing, refining, and purifying mana, the familiar chirping of the morning birds roused him from meditation. He was covered in sweat and dirt, his body leaching impurities from his mana core, making him dirty and hungry. Arthur looked at the remnants of the remaining bacon and realized that he had to hunt that day. After gnawing on the remaining charred squirrel meat, he packed a water bag and left. Keeping his mind calm and his presence hidden by the mirage walk, he slowly walked deeper into the dense forest. He noticed that the forest became quieter. Without the sound of chirping birds or beasts, there was only the rustling of the trees, as if even the wind was afraid. Arthur grew more curious as he got closer, making sure to hide his presence again. He increased his hearing and began to hear the gurgling sound of running water, as well as a faint sound that sounded like a growl. He realized that there were 2 silver panthers around the place, not just one. Arthur's guess was correct. When he approached the sound of the silver panthers, he saw their distinct silver fur near a small clearing beside the cliff. The ravine below looked deep and difficult to access. Arthur hid behind a nearby tree and observed the fight between the silver panthers. One of them had a distinct scar on its back, while its opponent seemed bigger and superior. The fight was fast and intense, with both panthers attacking and dodging each other. Claude, the smaller silver panther, seemed to have the upper hand in the fight. However, Arthur felt an unusual tension. The atmosphere around the forest was eerily quiet, with no chirping birds or other wild animals. Claude began to act cautiously, while his opponent took advantage of the opening to attack, and Claude fled. Arthur didn't understand why Claude was running away, while he felt something was wrong. Ignoring his sense of caution, Arthur decided to fight the larger silver panther. Wounded, the panther seemed ready to escape. Using the burst step technique, Arthur tried to attack the panther from a standing position, but the distance maintained was not enough. He grabbed the panther by the neck and used mana to strengthen his grip. After a fierce struggle, the panther went limp as it ran out of air. However, the panther suddenly jerked and used its remaining strength to throw itself backwards, causing them to fall into a steep ravine. As Arthur slid down, he was transported back in time to when he was thrown off the edge of the mountain to save his mother. Arthur struggles to decide the best course of action to take. With the already unconscious silver panther beneath him, he deployed mana to the legs and launched the Cyclone Roar spell to slow their fall. The wind blast generated from the spell made Arthur float slowly and stopped his fall. A thick dust cloud appeared after the collision with the ground, and Arthur began to emerge from the dust cloud while covering his mouth and nose. An earth-shaking rumbling sound followed him, and each pounding made him lose his balance. In panic, he ran to the edge of the ravine, hoping that the powerful sounds he heard were from an earthquake, not from a more dangerous creature. Arthur stepped cautiously towards the edge of the ravine, a sense of unease overcoming him as he sought shelter. A loud rumble shook the ground beneath him, while a powerful wave of wind swept up and broke apart the cloud of rubble that was the only shelter left. Quickly, Arthur realized that it was too late to hide. In an increasingly precarious situation, he knew that he had to prepare for the approaching danger. As he waited for the thick dust to clear, Arthur listened for heavy footsteps approaching him. The pressure from the top of the cliff increased significantly, as if something huge and dangerous was approaching him. As the fog of the ruins began to clear, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. Further clarifying its shape, it looked like a Titan bear, a creature that left Arthur feeling confused and shocked. The Titan bear stepped out of the mist, its mighty roar echoing through the air. It spoke in a booming voice, and Arthur felt even more confused. He had never imagined that a Titan bear would have half the size of its body and the ability to speak. Arthur wondered if this creature was really a Titan bear or just a bear cub. If it was a cub, perhaps this was an opportunity to deal with it. But if this Titan bear was an adult, then the situation would be much more dangerous. Arthur stood his ground, trying to determine his next move. He preferred to avoid direct confrontation with this beast until he got more information about the creature. The pressure exuded by this Titan bear was immense and threatening, so Arthur felt unprepared to face an adult version of the Titan bear that was capable of changing its size like Sylvie did. The Titan bear looked down, taking in the dead panther in front of it before turning its gaze back to Arthur. The creature seemed increasingly confident, and the smile on its face showed that it couldn't wait to continue the battle. Arthur realized that there was no other choice but to fight, and he quickly prepared himself to face his enemy. Although Arthur expected the Titan bear to attack him, the creature stood its ground. Without warning, the Titan bear lashed out by thrusting its claws at Arthur, the powerful thrust knocking Arthur backwards. The bell hanging from Arthur's waist rang loudly as he fell to the hard ground. Arthur gasped for air, relieved that he wasn't seriously injured. However, this attack signaled that he should be more careful in dealing with Titan bears. Arthur watched the Titan bear that was about 10 meters away from him. The creature seemed impatient, and the sight of a bear standing on two legs and speaking coherently was something strange to Arthur. The attack launched by the Titan bear was probably a ranged spell, but Arthur could not sense the mana or know the form of the attack. The Titan bear slowly raised its claws, as if mocking Arthur. As soon as the Titan bear started swinging its claws down, Arthur activated Mirage Walk and used Burst Step to dodge the attack. Although he tried his best to avoid the attack, a sharp pain suddenly appeared in his left leg, making him see fresh blood flowing from the wound on the back of his calf. Arthur realized that the attack was probably a sharp hidden attack, similar to the last attack he received. The smile on the Titan bear's face faded, as if it didn't expect Arthur to be able to dodge its attack. The Titan bear growled angrily, swinging its claws once again in an attempt to strike Arthur. Arthur was forced to fall to the floor to avoid the Titan bear's slash, the clipped ends of his hair falling onto his nose. Although it was a risky gamble, Arthur managed to figure out the Titan bear's attack pattern. When the Titan bear slashed with its claws, Arthur realized that the attack was a sharp slash, while his fist attack was a blunt attack. The Titan bear launched a fist at Arthur from a distance, sending an invisible thrust that made it difficult for Arthur to see the attack. Even as he tried to focus his mana into his eyes, he could not see the attack, forcing Arthur to throw himself blindly. The invisible spell attack slammed into his side, cracking his ribs. Without giving him time to prepare, the Titan bear continued with another paw attack, releasing a new spell immediately after its first. Arthur moved too wide to dodge the previous attack, unable to avoid the next one. Feeling the searing pain in his body, Arthur tried to gather more mana to protect himself, waiting for the next attack. The force of the Titan bear's spell knocked him to the ground, and blood spurted from his chest as 4 horizontal wounds formed under his collarbone. Arthur coughed, feeling the searing pain and realizing that he wouldn't be able to deal with a direct attack anymore. To deal with it, he had to get close and avoid the Titan bear's attack. The Titan bear, realizing Arthur's weakness, began to grin confidently. Arthur wasn't sure how the Titan bear was able to use such an almost invisible spell, but he knew there was a way to find out. Standing with his body trembling, Arthur waited as the Titan bear began to lift its leg. He decided to kick the ground in front of him with force, creating a cloud of dust that covered him from sight. 4 slices immediately split the created dust cloud, barely allowing Arthur to see how wide the Titan bear's attack was. Arthur immediately used Burst Step to dodge the attack. With a sharp pain in his leg, Arthur rolled on the ground and got back to his feet, preparing himself to fight again. He now understood the area to avoid from one of the Titan bear's attacks, but he still had to be careful to avoid all attacks and keep a distance between them. The thought of Cordry's training suddenly came to mind, and although he felt helplessly smiling, Arthur knew he had to stay focused and not let himself lose. Looking at the increasingly frustrated and impatient Titan bear, Arthur decided to stop running. He stood tall with his arms raised, ready to face whatever was coming. Arthur closely observed the triumphant grin etched on the Titan bear's face. The giant creature, calmly, launched another slashing attack using its sharp claws. Arthur felt that time was limited to respond to the attack. He immediately activated his modified Burst Step technique, a skill he had practiced hard. With full concentration, he channeled mana into the right muscles at the right time, strengthening his bones to withstand the profound force of the push. However, he heard a sharp cracking sound from his feet before he felt the familiar sensation of high-speed movement as the Titan bear's blunt spell slammed into his chest. Arthur's body was displaced less than a meter to the right side, and the strike that should have ripped through his chest only narrowly missed his left shoulder. Blood began to flow from the deep wound on his left leg due to the sudden pressure exerted to use Burst Step, creating a small crater under his foot. Although this new skill was successful, the increasingly unbearable pain began to fill his mind with doubts. With strong determination and willpower, Arthur fought the pain crawling through his body, concentrating more mana into his lower body. The Titan bear looked at Arthur with initial confusion, but its gaze soon turned sour as it narrowed its eyes in annoyance. Before the Titan bear had a chance to launch its next attack, Arthur kicked the ground once more, creating a cloud of debris to separate them. With less than a second to dodge the bear's attack after passing through the dust cloud, Arthur doubted that its next attack would consist of a single blow. In the midst of trying to avoid the deadly attack, Arthur discovered the key to successfully implementing the new Burst Step. Just as he had to coordinate the mana in his muscles to propel his body, he also had to mimic the flow of mana in his body to stop the movement. The ground beneath his feet crumbled again due to the force he had to expend to stop, but he succeeded once again. The cloud of dust that Arthur had created was torn into pieces by the Titan bear's attack that was heading straight for him. With blurred vision, Arthur pushed himself to the right. The hard ground cracked from his powerful landing about 2 meters away. The first step made him grimace in pain, but using the Burst Step again sent an explosion of pain throughout his lower body as muscles and bones nearly broke under the pressure. When the bell rang, alerting him of his position, Arthur held back the scream of pain that nearly escaped his throat and executed Burst Step once more to get closer to his opponent. The Titan bear's head spun at the sound of the bell, but by then, Arthur had already closed the gap. The Titan bear's black eyes widened as its jaws opened in shock. Amidst the haze of pain, Arthur grinned sarcastically. Mana was already concentrated in his fist until it glowed slightly. The Titan bear tried to punch back, but Arthur's enlarged fist dug deep into the bear's abdomen, creating a loud thud as the fists collided. The Titan bear's body darted over the edge of the ravine and crashed into the rocky cliff where Arthur had fallen. Arthur's legs, which were numb from the pain, were finally unable to bear the weight of his body, and the cold ground soon clung to his cheeks. With the last remaining strength, Arthur tore the bell from his waist and crushed it in his hands before his vision darkened and an enticing call put him to sleep. Arriving at the canyon, Winsome examined the scene. A silver panther lay dead, with the ground covered in blood beneath it. The nearby boulders had deep wounds, while there were craters in the ground and walls surrounding it. Winsome saw the boy on the ground with craters depressed in the cliffs surrounding the chasm. Winsome was shocked at Arthur's condition. The boy was in very poor condition. His clothes were torn, at least 3 of his ribs were broken, and the wound on his chest was too deep to be considered a normal wound. However, the most concerning wound was surprisingly on his leg, which had turned stained with purple and red due to extensive internal bleeding. Winsome could not see how severe his injuries were, but immediate treatment was required. In his heart, Winsome felt guilty for leaving Arthur alone. Mr. Indrath had ordered him to give the boy room to develop on his own, but looking at his current state, Arthur could have died. After tending to the boy, Winsome focused his attention on the creature lying in the center of the blast radius on the rocky wall of the ravine. It looked like a Titan bear cub, but that made no sense. A cub of this size didn't even have the strength to defend itself. There should be no way it could hurt Arthur like this. An adult Titan bear would stand at least 3 meters tall, possessing superior defense with its thick fur. However, even an adult bear would not be able to cause this much destruction. Unless, as Winsome took a closer look at the Titan bear cub, its body began to contort unnaturally. Suddenly, its belly bulged before black tentacles erupted from within the dead mana creature's body, writhing frantically before finally slumping down. Winsome was satisfied with this discovery. It explained a lot, and he breathed a sigh of relief, recognizing Arthur's power. The demon leech, which was a rare and intelligent specimen that only came from Ephiodus, had possessed the cub's body. Although the demon leech itself was weak, its ability to strengthen its host's core made the creature extremely powerful. Seeing how large the demonic leech had grown inside the bear cub, Winsome could guess that this monster must be a level stronger than an ordinary Titan bear. The boy was lucky that the bear cub's body was still fragile. If the leech had possessed an adult Titan bear, Winsome wasted no time in postulating alternative possibilities. Although no one wanted this to happen, Arthur was right to aim for the bear cub's abdomen, because this was where the demonic leeches lived. If the leech had the power to enter Arthur's body while he was unconscious, not even Lord Indrath would be able to save him without paralyzing him. Winsome pried out the demonic leech from inside the corpse and crushed the parasite in his hand. In his hand, there was a sparkling white orb that had been purified by the demonic leech in the Titan bear's body. He picked Arthur up, placed the white orb in his mouth, and softly spoke as if Arthur's troubles had paid off. When he finally opened his eyes, Arthur was greeted by the sight of the underside of the humble cottage roof. His tongue felt dry from lack of water, but his body felt relatively fine, at least that's what he thought until he tried to move. When he tried to lift his legs, there was no response at all. There was no sensation or feedback from the waist down. Quickly, he lifted the blanket covering his body and saw that his legs had been bandaged and tied tightly with wooden splints, preventing him from moving. A soft voice caught Arthur's attention. The voice came from an elderly woman who looked elegant and caring. Her face was dotted with fine wrinkles that signaled her advanced age, but her dignified and graceful demeanor had not faded. Dressed in a simple gray robe, her hair was tied back and pulled down in a ponytail. With a gentle smile, the woman approached and stated that Arthur's leg was fine and that she had sedated it to prevent any prolonged pain. Arthur was relieved to hear the explanation and lay back down on the bed. The old woman placed her warm hand on Arthur's forehead and asked him how he felt. Arthur blinked, feeling confused and trying to remember the last event he had experienced. He remembered landing a hard punch on the Titan bear before passing out. As he surveyed his surroundings, he realized that he was in a spacious and bright room, warmed by the crackling fire in the stone fireplace. Next to the fireplace was a small kitchen filled with pots and pans of various sizes, while worn upholstered sofas were placed around the fireplace, and a small dining table was located in front of the kitchen. The room looked simple yet cozy. The old woman chuckled, responding to Arthur's confusion with understanding. She quickly got up and returned with a glass of warm water. After a few comforting sips, Arthur felt confident enough to express his gratitude. The woman introduced herself as Meyer, refusing to be called by a more formal title. Meyer finished her task by cleaning the empty cup from Arthur's hand, and Arthur felt more comfortable as the pain began to subside. When Meyer began to unwrap the bandages on Arthur's legs, she found scars spread across both legs. Arthur's knees and ankles were the most severely injured, and the scars looked as if they had been there for years. Cold sweat began to bead on Arthur's forehead as the pain intensified. Meyer carefully examined every inch of Arthur's leg after removing all the bandages. Once satisfied with his inspection, he took out a bucket filled with a very pungent herbal liquid. Meyer meticulously cut and moistened pieces of cloth, bandaging Arthur's leg with deft and rhythmic movements. Arthur was mesmerized by Meyer's skill in treating his leg. When Meyer finished the treatment, he asked how it felt. Arthur felt a significant sense of comfort thanks to the cold liquid soaking the new bandage, and gratefully expressed his gratitude. Meyer accepted the thanks with a calm smile, then collected the used cloth and threw it into a basin of water. After pouring a salt-like powder into the basin, Meyer lifted her gown and stepped into the basin to wash the rags. Arthur was concerned at Meyer's exhaustion and offered to help wash the cloth, but Meyer refused and continued her work with dedication. Arthur watched attentively, sensing the serenity in Meyer's care, and was grateful for her attentive care. Arthur Lewin felt his body begin to recover from the pain, but he still felt a nagging discomfort. While sitting up in bed, he noticed an elderly woman who seemed to be very dedicated in taking care of him. This woman, who introduced herself as Meyer, gently nursed Arthur's injured leg. She patiently went about her task, shaking out wet cloths and soaking them in a basin of water, while constantly stepping into the water to clean the cloths. Arthur, who saw this process, was confused and wondered if they were still in Epheotis, a place known for its magical abilities. Meyer explained that she was still in Epheotis, and that although magic could speed up the healing process, there were some things that could only be understood and felt directly without magical assistance. She also stated that she utilized magic to fix Arthur's leg, although there are things that are better not simulated by magic. Meyer said that if he had only relied on ordinary healing magic, Arthur might have been in a worse state, and his bones might have been deformed. With skillful and deft movements, Meyer used the art of mana to treat Arthur's wounds. Along with this process, Meyer demonstrated her extraordinary ability to use magic to effectively speed up the healing process. When Meyer unleashed a cold blast that burned Arthur's chest, the previously bleeding wounds healed quickly. Meyer not only treated Arthur's physical wounds, but also provided emotional support with her gentle smile and caring demeanor. After treating his wounds, Meyer offered Arthur warm soup, a symbol of hospitality and care. Arthur felt grateful for the care he received and showed gratitude for Meyer's kindness, although he felt somewhat uncomfortable in an unfamiliar place. Meanwhile, Meyer warned Arthur to rest and not try to get up that night, as his wounds needed time to heal. Meyer made sure Arthur knew that there was water within reach and a small bathroom beside his bed if needed. After giving her warning, Meyer left Arthur to rest. In the almost complete darkness of the night, there was only a hint of moonlight filtering through the thatched roof of the cottage. The fire that had been burning in the hearth had been extinguished, leaving only a faint scent of smoke. Arthur felt restless and worried about his healing process. Unable to go back to sleep, he decided to do the only productive thing he could do under the circumstances: meditate. Arthur concentrated on the mana core swirling inside his body. He felt a burst of unfamiliar energy greet him, transforming the mountain he had been climbing to reach the silver core into a more accessible plane. Directing his attention to the energy around him, he began to purify it, only to feel an unfamiliar energy absorbing the mana he had absorbed and fusing it with his own mana core. The originally light yellow-colored mana core began to shine brighter, filling his entire body with fiery energy. Arthur felt a shock in his body as his silver core began to glow with a bright silver color. The wild energy raging inside his body continued to eat away at the mana core layer, making his silver core grow brighter and brighter. Carefully, he held his breath, trying to keep this change steady, fearing that the slightest change could stop the rapid development of his mana core. Finally, the mysterious energy that had increased his mana core to the peak of the mid-stage subsided, and Arthur felt his body return to a better state. Just when he felt the transformation was complete, a sharp scream of clanging metal filled his ears. As if the invisible wall holding his mind was gone, his body forcibly moved into the second phase of Sylvia's dragon's will. As Arthur opened his eyes, he saw golden runes emerging from his arms and shoulders. To his surprise, the runes began to change, their designs becoming increasingly intricate as they formed an ancient language. His disheveled hair began to change color from its natural blonde to white, then back to blonde again. Inside the humble cottage, the furniture began to shake. Straw and debris from the roof fell, filling the room with more moonlight. Although pots and pans clinked against each other, the only sound that filled Arthur's ears was the high-pitched ringing. As his hair returned to its original color, the newly formed runes on his body glowed brighter and brighter until the color began to disappear from the world. Soon, the only colors visible were the tiny particles floating around him. However, something was different. During the use of Dragon's Awakening, Arthur could only see 4 colors representing the 4 elements. Now, purple spots were scattered among the colors blue, yellow, red, and green. Arthur recalled the time he used the second phase of Sylvia's will to kill Lucas. He felt that he had gotten better at controlling the urges that came with the second phase. However, Sylvia's will seemed to resist his body harder than before, making him almost unable to endure the pain that tore through his body. When Arthur released Dragon Awakening, as if a bucket of water had been thrown to extinguish a raging fire, all the energy, strength, and pain that had been growing within him suddenly disappeared. An eerie silence enveloped Arthur, and he felt confused, helpless, and weak even though his mana core had made progress. Suddenly, Meyer's voice rang out from the entrance, activating his realm heart. Meyer leaned against the doorway with a serious and sentimental expression. She realized that Arthur had truly inherited the realm heart, evident from the purple glowing eyes and glowing runes on his body. Even among the clan, this was rare. Realm heart, or realm heart physique, is an ability that only descendants of the Indrath clan have. Meyer approached Arthur and asked if he could see the colors that made up the physical world. Arthur recalled the array of colors floating around him and said that he thought so. Meyer explained that the realm heart physique was named by the ancestors of the Indrath clan because the user's attunement with the physical world was considered unparalleled in this form. Although the ability itself doesn't have much power, realm heart allows the user to gain knowledge and insight unattainable by those who don't possess it. Knowledge is power. Arthur recalled the first time he used realm heart to fight the Elderwood guards. He thought it was just a power boost, but from Meyer's explanation, it seems that realm heart actually allows him to use mana more efficiently. Arthur asked why he could see purple particles when using the second phase of realm heart, when before he only saw 4 colors. Meyer pondered for a moment before explaining that as proud beings, Ajuras, including himself, are sometimes reluctant to share their secrets. However, Meyer offered to teach Arthur a few things, although he never expected to get such an offer. Meyer began to explain the basics of mana and how it affected the physical world. Most of Meyer's explanations were already known to Arthur to some degree, but the way Meyer strung his words together and explained everything in a digestible way showed that he was far more knowledgeable than any of the mana professors at Cyrus Academy. Meyer explained that it was unnatural for lesser beings, or even Ajuras, to manipulate raw mana. Mages with a certain affinity to elements have an easier time absorbing atmospheric mana related to their particular element. However, the absorbed mana must still be purified for use. For someone with a realm heart physique, a mage with a fire affinity would appear to absorb red mana particles, but after the purification process, the mana would appear white the first time it was used. This was the reason why body-strengthening spells could be used regardless of a mage's affinity type. Arthur asked why, if the absorbed and purified mana turned white, it was impossible for them to use a different element. Meyer explained that it was impossible to control the specific type of element absorbed by a mage, so the mage would naturally absorb which particles best suited his body. Mages with an affinity for water, for example, will absorb more water elements during the process of purifying raw mana, and this will affect how they concentrate and visualize those elements when casting spells. Meyer continued his explanation by comparing Arthur's experience when he first cast the spell. For example, a magician with fire affinity has to concentrate more on the shape, proportion, density, and launching speed when launching a fireball, while a magician with water affinity does not have the same difficulty when gathering and launching a stream of water. Arthur sat attentively in the quiet room, confronted by Meyer, an Ashura known for his deep knowledge of the Aether. Their discussion had gone on for hours, covering various aspects of the elements and magical powers present in their world. Meyer, who had explained about how witches absorbed the water element during the purification process, finally moved on to a more complex topic, the Aether. Meyer began by explaining the fundamental difference between Aether and mana. She said that although both elements make up the world they live in, the Aether functions very differently compared to mana. He illustrated this concept with a simple analogy, using a glass half full of water. Meyer explains that manipulating the water in the glass is relatively easy when relying solely on mana, but changing the shape of the glass itself without breaking it is much more difficult. Through this analogy, Meyer wants to show that the Aether, as a cup, holds a different potential compared to mana, which serves as the water that fills it. In his explanation, Meyer emphasized that although there are many theories about the Aether, even the Indrath clan, who are known as experts in the use of the Aether, do not have a theory that is truly adequate to fully explain how the Aether works. The Indrath clan had the advantage of physically detecting the Aether using the physical realm heart. However, they could not sense the Aether in the physical realm. The laws that hold their world together, like a glass that holds water, remain a mystery that cannot be fully understood by beings who do not possess such special abilities. Meyer also explained how the purple particles Arthur saw while using the realm heart were the Aether itself. With realm heart, Arthur can see the boundaries of the world more clearly, as if looking through the glass. Meyer states that although a detailed explanation of the history and development of the understanding of the Aether could be lengthy and may not always be useful to Arthur, it is important for Arthur to understand that he has a very valuable ability. The Azuras would greatly appreciate this skill, even though Arthur's body was not of the dragon race, which is known to have special potential. By using realm heart, Arthur felt a significant increase in strength. Initially, he thought of this increase as a form of additional power, but he soon realized that it was more of an increase in control over his abilities. Meyer confirmed that for individuals with unique compositions like Arthur, mana manipulation with realm heart can make a huge difference. However, he cautioned that control over mana is more linear compared to Aether. While mana can be manipulated with a larger core size, control of the Aether allows one to manipulate the object itself, such as controlling the glass itself, not just the water inside. Meyer explained further that although many people use the term manipulate the Aether, it is actually more correct to say that they affect the Aether. Arthur, who had experienced the ability to stop time with Sylvia's will, realized that there were more components to the Aether than just time manipulation. The three main components of the Aether authority over time, space, and all living components are key to understanding the Aether. Meyer also recounted that the ancestors of the Indrath clan had spent their lives trying to understand one of the three main avenues of the Aether, only to realize that they lacked the ability to fully master it. However, over time, they had found a way for some Azuras to know their aptitude for the use of Aether. Meyer then revealed that the runes flowing on one's body due to the use of Realm Heart could indicate the path of their talent. When Meyer closed his eyes and began to show the runes that appeared on his arm, Arthur felt an intense pressure, almost comparable to the pressure he had felt from Cordry. Although this pressure was not as hard or violent as Cordry's, he felt a much greater force. The runes on Meyer's arm looked like interconnected tree branches or streams of water, different from Arthur's runes, which looked intricate and detailed. Meyer finally opened her eyes and looked at Arthur with a cold yet meaningful gaze. She explained that the different-looking runes on each Realm Heart user indicated their talent path. In this case, Meyer's runes indicated that she was from the Vivum path, which allowed Meyer to heal others. Arthur, mesmerized by the explanation and the sight of the runes, was unable to give an immediate response. He sensed that Meyer's presence and the runes running down his arm were much brighter and clearer than the power he possessed. Meyer's eyes seemed to almost pulsate, as if they had a mind of their own. Meyer then asked Arthur to activate his Realm Heart. Although Meyer's presence was intimidating, Arthur felt the urge to reveal his true potential and understand more about his Aether powers. This explanation opened up new insights for Arthur, allowing him to better explore and develop his abilities.